PT appointment. But so if I ask you to repeat yourselves, I apologize in advance.
No problem.
Well, welcome to today's CEAFU conference, and our CEAFU lunch break. And today we're joined by our esteemed guests. One is Larry Sand from California, and the other is Milton Chappell. Let me first introduce you to those two. Larry Sand started his, educational journey, you might say, in New York, and then he went to Los Angeles Unified School District. So I'd say he's got a very impressive background as far as at least understanding public schools, perhaps the worst public schools in the country. I guess he flew over Chicago and missed that opportunity. But there you obviously enriched young minds, not only in elementary education, but in English, mathematics, history, ESL, also coordinated Title I programs. So he's had his hands in a lot of the programs, understands them extremely well. And he retired in 2009, and he assumed or became the president of the California Teachers Empowerment Network, a nonprofit organization committed to equipping educators with impartial and accurate data on professional associations and educational matters, a contrast to often one-sided information that school districts and unions have a tendency to provide. And I would say he was, for many years, probably a lone voice in the wilderness, I imagine, recognizing the widespread dissemination of misleading information to parents and taxpayers and the public by the mainstream media. In 2011, you broadened your outreach to demystify educational challenges and policies affecting the nation. And we hope you will help demystify some more for us today. And I'd like to also welcome Milton. He's hopefully you may have met him before, but Milton has served as National Right to Work Legal Defense Attorney as a staff attorney since 1976. His legal expertise has been pivotal in Supreme Court cases and other judicial administrative proceedings, safeguarding against forced unionism. His efforts have established key procedures and notifications that help non-union educators minimize mandatory union dues used for political and other activities they do not support. And clearly he was a big factor in the Janus victory. It's one of the probably major consultants on the case, and helping write a lot of it, I imagine, but I don't want to go too far in what I'm saying. And Mr. Chappell's legal practice includes defending clients with political or religious objections to union membership or dues, upholding right-to-work statutes in states like Indiana and Wisconsin. Milton's a constitutional labor law authority, particularly on First Amendment rights, and he has represented clients across numerous states and, of course, the District of Columbia. Mr. Chappell holds memberships in multiple bar associations, including Maryland, District of Columbia, and the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, welcome to you both, and I'm so glad to have you here. And as you probably saw in the question, the question is, why have most union members, particularly we'll talk with teachers, never had a chance to vote for the actual union that represents them? You always use the air quotes. Represents them in the school. I mean, they've literally been at the school, for I don't know how many. The union's been there for so many more years than the teacher ever got there, and they never got to choose this union or even had a chance to make them re-vote. So when I often hear unions say they're a democracy, and it's a democracy type situation, but what kind of democracy is there? One vote and that's it for the rest of the I guess unions can never die technically because they're like a corporation. They just basically live on and on and on. So there's a lot of issues here, and I want to open it up to you two to kind of explain maybe how we got here, what can be done about it, and are there states doing something about it? I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to both of you and move it to a two shot unless you guys discuss it and add some wisdom to our situation. Thank you.
Milton wants to start.
Whoever wants to start, fine.
Well, curiosity question. And as a good attorney, I know I should not ask this question because you do not ask the question you do not already know the answer to. But I do not know the answer to this. So let me ask Larry, first of all, I'm assuming that when you taught in New York City and in LA in the public schools there, you were most of the time, if not all the time, represented by a union or the bargaining unit that you taught in. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started teaching in New York in 1971, and then the head of the UTLA was teacher union godfather Al Shanker,
Yes.
who basically ran the school district. I have no idea who the superintendent was, but I sure remember Al Shanker,
Right.
who really was the, as I say, teacher union godfather. And
Right.
then I stopped teaching for about 10 years. I got laid off in New York in 1975. The city was going broke, so they laid off teachers and they laid off the newest hires. And I didn't
Yes.
understand this because I may not have been the greatest teacher in the world, but I was sure better than a lot of people who kept their jobs. And I didn't understand, what the seniority system was all about.
You can you can thank the unions for that because, as you well
Absolutely, yeah,
know, one of their third rails or their non-negotiable items is seniority and first in, first out, and no care whatsoever of merit. And that situation. Then you moved to California, started teaching in public schools there, and again, there was a union representing the teachers there. I think it was was it a joint union at that time, both NEA and AFT, or did that
yeah.
come
I,
later?
I think it still is. It's a rarity, and yeah, it's the
Yeah,
United Teachers of Los Angeles, and
right,
I joined the union the way most teachers do because I didn't know any better. And
exactly.
the
And they
unions
don't.
they're going to pretend. You buy into their pardon my expression BS, which they're
Right,
loaded with, and that's what you do. But then over the years, I just started noticing things. I noticed that awful teachers were keeping their jobs, and some teachers got laid off, and they were the really good teachers. And then I just sort of as I started snooping around, I realized that the union was not for me, and I quit the union in the early aughts. I don't really remember the year, and then I subsequently co-founded the California Teachers Empowerment Network, which aims to get information to teachers about the union and other educational issues, as Don said.
right. And we're so glad that you did. And back to, like you said, I joined the union. I didn't know any better. I'm putting words in your mouth, but
Yeah,
and they clearly do not give you all the information.
no,
Anyone joining the union is not making an informed decision, nor are they granting them informed consent. If this was a surgery or a hospital or medical procedure, they would fail miserably in getting your consent, and it would not be considered binding in any way whatsoever. Now, my next question goes to, in either place, New York or LA, did you ever have a chance to vote on whether the union should be the bargaining representative?
no, it's a monopoly.
This is one of those questions I don't know the answer to, and I was hoping you were going to say no, because that leads into the question that I think Don wants us to discuss. And what is the reason that I believe the title or the script that was on the screen earlier said 95% of teachers have never voted for the union representative or the union that masquerades as their representative, and why is that? And so the legal reason is that the unions wrote the statutes, and they wrote the statutes to give a false sense of democracy. So they write the statute that says before a union can come in and have the state certify them as the exclusive bargaining rep, they need to come in through some kind of an election or card showing that supposedly shows that at least the majority of those who are either signing the cards or voting in the election support the union or want them to come in. Now, I did not say a majority of those in the bargaining unit or those employees that the union will be representing. So the first thing they wrote was that we can come in really easy. Okay. But we will use that facade, so to speak, to then argue that we're a democratic institution and that we have democracy. And all that we are is just a mini little, like the United States, we're a little legislature or your state legislature that's in the workplace. And this is democracy working at its best. Okay. But we all know we're all citizens. I hope we all vote. And we all know that all our representatives, whether it's the governor or the president, even on city council, even on the school board, they have to stand for reelection. Our elections only last maybe 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever it is, but they don't last forever. Okay.
Mm.
But guess how the unions wrote? Now, they said they were borrowing off the American system. They are a virtue of democracy. I hope you get my sarcasm.
Maybe the South American system. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But they didn't write it as our country and our democracy works at all. Because had they written it that way, they would have had to prove their worth. They would have had to fight in the marketplace of ideas, and they would have had to show their worth. But no, they wrote it in a way that they could argue and claim to be a democracy, but not have any of the responsibilities of a democracy. So, guess what? No, except in a few states, and it's not at the federal level at all, and it's in almost all the states, there is no requirement that the unions stand for reelection. Okay? Instead, they put into the law a very cumbersome and bulky system that has the theory of election without the reality of an election. And what that is called decertification. And so remember, I said that when the union comes in, whoops, I lost my ears. When the union comes in the first place, they're voted in, and based on that vote, the government certifies them as the bargaining agent. So there is a procedure for the government to remove that certification. But what it does, it requires that, first of all, there has to be a showing by 30% of those in the bargaining unit have to sign papers within a certain time frame and only at certain times of the life of the collective bargaining agreement, that they can then petition for an election to determine whether the union remains or is removed or decertified. Now, it's 30% of the whole bargaining unit. It is not uncommon that unions come in a vote that actually represents 10% of the bargaining unit. So I like easy math. So let's say the bargaining unit is 3,000. Okay. And so only 500 people vote. 300 vote for the union. So 300 out of 500 is a majority of those voting, and the union comes in. But 300 versus 3,000 that they're now going to represent is 10%. To throw them out, you've got to have 30% of everyone in the bargaining unit. Then they schedule an election, which can be delayed repeatedly by various actions of the union. And then they at least make this part the same. A majority of those who vote end up determining whether the union remains or is decertified. But if you don't get that 30% showing, you go all the hoops, you meet all the qualifications, you overcome all the objections that the union will throw, not to mention the campaign when there is an election scheduled. Only by doing all of that is a union ever removed. So it stays in power forever, basically. It's perpetual. And that is why 95% of teachers have never voted on whether their union should be the bargaining. And it's not uncommon. Remember, many of these state laws came in the early 70s or in the 70s. So it's not uncommon now that we are 50 years or more past that you will have no one teaching today that ever voted the union in, much less maybe 10%. So that is why we have the situation that our topic today wants us to discuss. And unless the states change the law, it's going to remain that way. Now, that's not democracy, that's dictatorship, because that's how dictators work.
Mhm.
So, Larry, you never had that vote, did you?
No, and
The dictatorship.
yeah, and I mean, teachers actually have the power to change that, but teaching is, when you're in a unionized state, teaching is a very safe job. It's not an easy job necessarily, of course, but it's a safe job, and you can't get fired. Basically, it's almost impossible to fire a teacher, as you well know. So, what kind of people only want safe jobs? Go into a safe job is a passive person. You don't get entrepreneurs, and movers and shakers and doers becoming teachers. Now, this is not to say that there aren't some wonderful, dedicated teachers. I'm just making a generalization about a personality type. So, most teachers either don't know or don't care. They just like their perks, and they fork over their $1,000, $1,200, $1,400 a year blindly, which the school district acts as a pass through for it and charges the taxpayer for the service. So, and it's really going to be up to teachers to make those changes or to push for those changes. And I'm not optimistic that it's going to happen, at least not in my lifetime.
Right. So, there have been two states in the last 15 years or less that have changed their monopoly bargaining statute as it applies to teachers and sometimes to other public employees to take a look at this situation that the union stays in unless you go through this unbelievable burdensome process that I just described as decertification, meeting all the numbers, et cetera, et cetera. Wisconsin was the first one to do it when they passed Act 10. And what that does, it sets up that the union can only be certified for 1 year. Okay. Now remember the normal system. I really don't like using the word normal, but the system that is most prevalent, let's phrase it that way, is they're there until the teachers themselves basically rise up and go through all the procedures. So once they're certified, the certification is forever unless it's removed by this very cumbersome method. So Wisconsin changed that. Wisconsin said, we're only going to give a certification for 1 year. So what does that mean? That means that the union has to stand for election every year. Okay? And you don't have to get 30% showing. You don't have to do anything. This just like we don't have to do anything to have every 4 years we vote for the president. Every 2 or 6 years we vote for senators. Every so many years we vote for mayors and city councilmen and school board members. Okay? We don't have to do anything except register, show up, and vote. And that's the way the system works in Wisconsin now. And the unions have to stand for election and they have to win by now they switch the rules there also. They don't have to win by a majority of those voting. They have to win by an absolute majority of those that they are going to represent. Okay? So they have to prove, which is what the law claims, that they have majority support in the bargaining union. Because remember my example earlier, I showed that you could have a 10% support and still be the bargaining rep. That is not majority support. But the whole idea of the democracy works on the idea that you have majority support. So Wisconsin did it right. Okay. You have to stand for election ever so often. They did it every year. And you have to win by an absolute majority. That means that everyone who does not go to the polls is basically voting no union. Okay? Because they can win the election, but if it's under that majority, so let's go back to my 3,000 example. They could, if you had, let's say, 2,000 showing up, and they ended up with 1,200, let's see, 1,200 would be a majority of the 2,000. They would still lose because they needed 15,000 plus one to have the majority of the 3,000 bargaining unit. It's unfortunate that more states have not followed Wisconsin's model to really give teachers and all public employees some kind of freedom and some kind of say in whether they really want a union there or not. Now, Florida, a year or two ago, they somewhat adopted the Wisconsin model, but with a twist. So what they do is they also have 1 year certification. But every year, the union has to do an audit, and they have to provide the government with certain financial information, including the number of dues-paying members that they have within the bargaining unit the month before the audit is due. If that number is 60% or more, they are automatically recertified for another year without a vote. But if that number falls below 60% of dues-paying members, then they have 1 month to seek an election to determine whether they continue. So again, they have to do it. The teachers don't have to do it. If they fail to file the signatures and the petition within that month, then their certification runs out at the end of the year. They're not recertified. If they do file that petition and those papers, then they hold the election. Now, Florida has a slight twist from Wisconsin. They can get recertified on the basis of a majority vote for that recertification. But again, theirs is triggered by membership, dues-paying membership, and it is yearly, although it is automatically removed if they show that 60% of the bargaining unit are paying with their money, voting with their money, wallets, so to speak. So those are two systems that go to the heart of giving teachers a way to vote repeatedly, not never, like in your situation, Larry. So you like those concepts?
Yeah, yeah, and sadly, as you point out, only 2 out of 50 states are doing that.
Correct.
And
Correct.
yeah, I mean, well, Scott Walker did a lot of great things in 2010, but and what DeSantis now is doing is good, but these people are rare. And as I said before, teachers need to rise up. I mean, if I'm a good teacher, why do I have to be represented by a union? And and then the union say, "Oh, well, you don't want to join us. You're a free rider." And I say, "No, I'm a forced rider." Well, I used to be anyway before the Janus
Correct.
decision came down. And even the Janus decision, unfortunately, didn't get into this area of exclusive representation. It's a monopoly. Why? If I think I'm a really good teacher and I should make more than what the union salary scale is. Why should I be able to go to the school district and say, "Hey, I'm worth $100,000 a year, and I can prove it. I just came out of a private school and I taught these kids, and I have great credentials, and I can give you recommendations up to the wazoo." Can't do that. I have to be represented by the union because they demand exclusivity,
Right.
and it's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Right. Now, there is one state that has put a new twist on exclusivity, and that's Tennessee. So, Tennessee, it may be 5 years ago now, changed so the federal government and all states except Tennessee that have monopoly bargaining for teachers have it under this exclusive representative status. So I should have mentioned that when they get certified based on this vote, they get certified as the representative for everyone in the bargaining unit or for all the teachers. And it forces the public employer or the school board to negotiate only with the union. They cannot negotiate with individual teachers, and it prohibits individual teachers from negotiating the example that you just gave us, Larry, of coming in and working out your own salary based on the merits and why you deserve and should be paid that higher salary. And everyone is forced into the union's dogma and the way that they see the world and how they want to push it. Okay? But Tennessee 5 years ago said, let's shake things up a little bit. And so what they did is they said that they have a modified exclusive representation model. It's quite interesting. So any union can come in and bargain with the school district if they show that they have 15% membership within the bargaining unit. And so you don't have necessarily just one union at the bargaining table.
Mhm.
So you can have 3 unions, you can have 4 unions, you can have whatever the math lets you have. If you only have one union that has more than 15 and no other group has at least 15%, then you have one union. Now, it is true that at the end of this negotiation, with arguably 2 or 3 unions on one side and the school board on the other side, the collective bargaining agreement then does apply. It's an exclusive agreement that applies to all the teachers. And like in the standard exclusivity situation, the individual teachers cannot bargain directly with the school board, but they would have to bargain through their union representatives that had at least a 15% showing. So that's another twist. We do have states since the 2000s that are trying some different attempts on this standard or common practice of unbelievable power to the union. Now, we do have 7 states that perhaps have done it right. And those 7 states prohibit collective bargaining. Okay? You don't have an exclusive bargaining rep. Now, you can still have a union, a group of people. We have a constitutional right to form associations and to petition our government. Okay? What monopoly bargaining does, what exclusive bargaining does, it has the government come in and force certain things on its citizens. Okay? And that's where the rub is. And despite what the unions will tell you, and they are dead wrong, there is no union or any individual has no constitutional right to collective bargaining. Okay? It's not in the United States Constitution. It's not part of the First Amendment. Collective bargaining, exclusive representative, all these things we're talking about. The Supreme Court has described it in one of my Supreme Court cases as an extraordinary gift from the legislature to a private party. So let's don't forget, at all times, the union is not government. They love to compare themselves to government. They love to say, oh, well, they get to tax, we should be able to force you to pay. Okay? They're not government, they're a private organization. They basically are a membership organization, supposedly doing what their members want. Okay? So, states can follow the federal exclusive bargaining compulsory union system that we've been discussing at length. They can do things in between, as some of the models of Tennessee, Florida, and Wisconsin have done, as I've just mentioned. Or they can do like 7 states, they can prohibit collective bargaining. And the union can come, it can speak at school board meetings, but the school board has no legal obligation enforceable in a court of law to listen to the union or to negotiate with them or to come to terms and a collective bargaining agreement. And those states include Arizona, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, and a few others. So that probably is the best model for freedom. and the best model for teachers to be paid what they're worth. Did we lose Don?
Just going to wait to. I thought Larry would have a comeback and tell him
Oh,
exactly.
no, I don't know. I don't really have anything to add. I mean, it's a start, but still, I mean, it's still, most of the country, it's monopoly bargaining. And the thing we also haven't discussed, it's not when you join a union, you're not only a teachers union, invariably, you're not joining just the local union. Most of your dues is going to the state. Here in California, most of it goes to the California Teachers Association, and then the National Education Association is a little more. Most teachers don't know this, that I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the CTA gets over $700 a year. The NEA gets over $200 a year. And then the local only charges about $300. And I mean, like, why do I have to support the CTA and the NEA? Especially because most of their money goes to politics. And if you're apolitical or on the right or even in the middle, why do I want my dues money going to left-wing politics? And all their politics are very left-wing. I mean, I just looked recently at the CTA website, and there are 40 some odd. Well, I mean, they talked about state legislators and some local mayor's races, and every one was a Republican except, there were one or two independents. Excuse me, everyone was a Democrat. A few independents. Now, they don't support one Republican. Now, why would a conservative teacher, and there are plenty of conservative teachers, they don't talk about it a lot as much as the left does, but why do they want to support these big unions, these big moneyed unions who take positions that they don't agree with? I don't get it.
Right. And no matter what position you take on the political, right, left, middle, whatever, the overwhelming majority, 98, maybe 100% of all those political positions have absolutely nothing to do with your working conditions in LA, in New York, in Palm Beach, and wherever you're teaching.
Oh yeah, they take positions on abortion, I mean, you name it, they have a position on it. And as Milton, you just pointed out, very little of it has to do with education.
Right. Many of them actually have positions in foreign issues in foreign countries. And they're actually sending money to various groups overseas over on whatever their issue is. How is that involving me as I teach Johnny how to spell?
Yeah. So I recently wrote, I said in Chicago, teachers pay $1,403 yearly to be a union member. However, as the Illinois Policy Institute reports, less than 17% of Chicago's teachers' union spending is dedicated to representing its members.
Right.
In other words, 5/6 of that teachers' dues is going toward politics that has nothing to do with them.
Right.
Yet teachers go along with it. And I'll go back and say it again, that teachers could do so much to improve the education by stopping being in a union. They don't have very little to lose. And if they lose their liability, they will lose their liability insurance in most cases. That's true. But you can join something like the Association of American Educators or Christian Educators. I mean, several independent organizations get the same or even better liability insurance at about a fifth of the cost.
Correct.
But teachers don't do it.
Well, when you look at the way that the teachers' unions are spending their money, the NEA, the AFT, and the figures that you just gave, and I'm not good on math, but the 83% that's not going on representation, what it looks like is that these organizations are political organizations, almost political parties who are using collective bargaining to fund their political aspirations. Okay, they're not collective bargaining agents. They are political agents who are using the collective bargaining model and system, including getting all this dues money, as their scheme to fund their political activities.
Well, I just quoted Chicago, and the mayor of Chicago is Brandon Johnson, who's a former CTA organizer. How
Right.
cute is that? I mean, isn't that cozy? I have no words. And I mean, there are other cases. Chicago is probably the most blatant. But teachers still join the CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union.
Well, this is why government should be out of the business here. Okay, totally. They shouldn't be writing favorable laws. They shouldn't, I mean, before Janice, they shouldn't be taking money and forcing you to support this. The union should exist like any other political party or any other membership group in the country, or even ideological group. Okay, they have a right to do that, but they shouldn't have government involved. Okay, the Supreme Court struck down back in the 1970s in Chicago the requirement that to be a Chicago employee, you had to pay to the Democratic Party. Okay, and they said that's wrong. The First Amendment stops that the political parties can have government support. And actually, the First Amendment protects you from that. But in the same year that they held that, they ruled in a book that it was okay to have unions do the same thing. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Thank goodness the foundation existed then, continued to not accept Abood as the right interpretation of the United States Constitution, continued to bring lawsuits, and I'm proud and honored to have fought that 40-some year fight, which ended and culminated in Janice making the correct interpretation and reversing the wrong Abood case and recognizing, as Justice Alito recognized in Janice, that unions are basically or heavily political. If it violates the First Amendment to require you to have to be a member of a political party and to pay to that party in order to have a government job, it has to violate the Constitution to have to join and pay money to a union. There is no difference between the two.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the Janice case, the ruling was you can't. It's kind of like the guy from the NEA said at one time, you can't separate the money. It's all political. Well, since it's all political, how can you allow a monopoly bargaining agent now, which is obviously a political agent, control people who don't want them to be controlled and who don't want to be controlled by it? Isn't that a violation of the First Amendment or something constitutional?
We believe it is, and we are continuing to bring lawsuits. I'm involved in one right now that we're asking the United States Supreme Court to hear and to strike down exclusivity as unconstitutional, or at least allow people who are covered by the union who say the union is basically destroying me, destroying my heritage. Our case involves a lot of anti-Semitism on behalf of the union. We represent Jewish professors, and they said, all we want to do is be out of the union. We want to go alone. We don't care what we're jumping into, so to speak. We cannot allow this group who has passed resolutions, who has held workshops instructing professors and students to attack us because of our religion, because of our ethnicity, because of who we are.
I'm very glad you said that, Milton. I was not aware of that. And as I mentioned earlier, while Janice's decision was terrific, it did not cover, forced, bargaining, monopoly bargaining.
Right.
And as I said before, why should I have to go along with that collective bargaining unit if I don't agree with it? And I'm just thrilled to hear that you're taking that on.
We are taking that on, and we're cautiously optimistic that the Supreme Court will grant our petition and hear this case. It clearly is timely, as we unfortunately see the news every day of what's going on, both in this country and around the world on this timely issue, and it's saddening. And I know it's going on in California with both the teacher unions and other unions, the vivid and massive anti-Semitism that they are carrying out throughout the state and on the people they represent. We've been in contact with quite a few Jewish teachers who are appalled at what's going on and want nothing to do, want to leave. As we put it in our brief, they want to dissent. The Supreme Court has long upheld the constitutional right to dissent. They find it part of the First Amendment, freedom of speech and freedom of association. And we are saying that what our people are trying to do here and what exclusivity and what monopoly bargaining prevents is their right to exercise the right to dissent. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned.
Amen. Yeah.
Sounds like another CEAFU lunch coming up.
Well, it may take a few months. The Supreme Court works very slowly.
Oh,
the other thing,
they're due to, I guess, start up again in about a week or two.
They are. We believe that the court will most likely consider this petition later this year. They're not considering it right now. We'll see. We don't totally control that, so we can't totally tell you when that would be. But we're hopeful that we'll have an answer maybe early next year, January, February. Anyway, this term, at least for whether they will hear the case. And we were very.
I assume what you're saying now is on the record, Milton, because you're saying it.
Yeah. Okay. It's a public. You can go and read the cert petition. You can also read. We were very happy that we had 11 different amicus briefs. Those are called friend of the court briefs that were filed on our behalf, asking the Supreme Court to take this case. And we were extremely honored. I believe we had 4 different Jewish groups that also outlaid the whole problem. They did a fantastic job of informing everyone of the degree of anti-Semitism that is in this country now and what has happened, especially since October 7th. It's hard to believe that we're almost coming up to a year of that heinous day. And so they have broadened the issue and explanation to the court, and we're hoping that the court will pay attention to their great briefs, and that will help us get the cert petition granted.
That's great news, Milton. Thank you.
If the court's looking at that, are they looking at places like MIT, which is a private sector school versus a public sector school? Is it possible they could rule on both, or is it just going to be narrowly defined again with the public sector?
It's going to be like Janus. It's going to apply to the public sector. So this one comes out of CUNY, New York University, City University, New York, which is a public. It's a joint city and state university funded system, and just like Janus only applies to the public sector, this case would also, at least initially, only apply to the public sector because the First Amendment applies to government. Okay, the First Amendment doesn't say anything about what private parties are supposed to do or not do among themselves. So MIT, I believe, is a private organization. I'm not at 100%, but I believe it is.
Yeah, but don't forget that just about every college in this country gets some public funding. I think there are like literally 22 or 23 colleges that don't get, like Hillsdale is a good example.
No.
But they all.
And that's why Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just saying they all accept public funding, so they may be private schools, but there's sort of a gray area, no?
Well, that comes in, there is a gray area. There's a whole issue of state action. That's why I said that the current challenge to exclusivity being brought out in New York on the anti-Semitism involved that's going on there is limited to the public sector, but that's why I also said we're starting there or at that point. So there are there's the funding source. There's also various federal laws that flow because of that money coming so heavily from the federal government that might be inroads. But the one thing, and I was going to mention this earlier, the one thing about the law, especially when you're changing the law or correcting the law, it's always baby steps. And especially the Supreme Court, they're very concerned about making huge changes or making them without giving a lot of signals that they're about to come. And so it's like turning the huge battleship around. It's not easy to make a sharp turn. And so we have to do it in baby steps. We started with forced dues, forced payment of dues. We're moving into forced representation. And unfortunately, justice is slow. I hate to say that. But we're moving in the right direction, and we're hopeful that the court will continue the slow correction of the battleship because it's clearly been going in the wrong direction the last 40 years.
Well, I mean, Janice must have been at least a 25-degree turn. I mean, come on, that was a pretty.
Okay. We need another 25-degree as we attack exclusivity.
Yeah.
However, the court, not to get into all the weeds, so to speak, of the law, over a 6-year period, I believe it was, the court started dropping hints of what it would do in Janus. And so it started to, and in some ways it's unfortunate because the unions read those hints and that's why they geared up to put restrictions on union members from being able to get out of the union or be able to stop paying dues after Janus came out. And they had 6 years and they used that time so that on day one, they already had these restrictive covenants already written in that had never existed in the previous 40 years of public sector unionism. And they started adding those and coming around and, in my opinion, misleading members into signing these new agreements with the fine print in them.
All right. Well, to summarize a little bit, how again did the unions get to where they get to vote once, and once they get in, they don't? I mean, I guess they keep trying and trying until they get in, and then once they get in, they never have to be voted on again.
They got that because the unions were very heavily involved in the writing of the original federal law, which we now call the National Labor Relations Act and the Railroad Labor Act, where they put that the unions come in by this vote, but are there unless they are decertified and set up the rules. And then in the Wisconsin actually started in the 50s, but it was an outlier. Most of the public sector bargaining, monopoly bargaining laws came in the 70s and early 80s. And so in the 70s and 80s, when the unions started pushing in the public sector for statutes to give them, they modeled most of those after the federal statutes, which had these already built into them.
Right.
Well, I think wasn't it John Kennedy? Wasn't it John Kennedy who first allowed public employees to unionize? Excuse me, federal employees, not public.
Yeah, he signed an executive order that recognized, like I said, the Constitution and federal law is that no government has to agree to a union for running its employees or its employee relations unless it agrees to. So there's no outside force. There's no constitution that requires that. Mm-hmm. So up until President Kennedy signed the executive order, there were basically no unions, and all the federal departments basically didn't meet with them. There may have been unions in existence because, like I said, they have a right to exist. And so he started on very small scales, opening up requirements to talk together, and then over the years it kept growing. And then finally, I believe again it was in the 70s, there was a national or a federal law passed by Congress that set up, quote, reforms in civil service that included within it the layout of federal monopoly bargaining. But interestingly enough, the federal law always had a right to work provision in it. And so while the federal law said, if you get the election and you can stay in for the 30% till you're decertified and we're going to force monopoly bargaining, they always had the proposition that you could not be required to join or pay money to the union. Mm-hmm. And that always stayed in place. Of course, Janus applies to the federal government as
Right.
well, all the state governments. So if the law had been different, Janus would have freed them. But yes, Kennedy started the opening, and that was obviously in the 60s. And I think everyone points to that as why the states started opening their laws, and then eventually the federal government did as well. And they basically borrowed from the existing private sector scheme because the predecessor of the National Labor Relations Act, called the Wagner Act, was actually passed in 1935. So we had a almost 30-year history of private sector monopoly bargaining, how unions come in, how they're decertified, it's unfair labor practices, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those got tweeted in 1947 under the Taft-Hartley amendments, when the public sector started coming up with their own rules, and they basically just followed that. So the simple answer to your question is you have to blame legislatures who passed these bills and bought into the union attorneys' drafting, wording, and arguments. It's called
Okay, well let's say I'm an Ohio educator, and I'm in Ohio, and I go, look, I've been here. My father and my mother both worked in the school system, and they always had the same union here. How am I ever going to have a vote to get them out? I mean, did they have to organize by school, or are they normally organized by the entire school district, and then you have to get the whole school district to agree with you practically to have a vote? I mean, how does it work?
Yes.
Is there a way to fix it?
Well, there's only
Is there a way to at least get a vote?
there is a way. It's based on the bargaining unit. So most school districts, for instance, Larry knows about this one. LA is a huge bargaining unit. I believe it's the second largest public school district in the United States.
Mhm.
And the bargaining unit is the whole school system. It's not the school you teach in. Okay.
Right. Sure.
So it's not, you may have 30%, you may have 60% of the teachers at your elementary school or your high school who want the union out. That won't work. You have to get 30% of the whole bargaining unit. So way back when, every little entity, every county, every city had their own school districts. When I talk about way back when, I mean way back when. And then there became a push, which the unions aided, of getting what's called unified school districts. And they were unified because they took in all the various school cities that were within a county, for instance, and put them all in one. Unions love huge bargaining units. Why? I just answered why. Remember, you have to get 30% of the bargaining unit to sign within a limited time frame and at only certain times in the school year or in the life of the collective bargaining agreement. All kinds of blockages are there to when you can do this. Okay. So the bigger the school district, the better off they are in basically making decertification impossible from a practical standpoint. Okay.
Milton, I'm a little confused. I always thought a unified school district was unified because it had elementary and high school. Because,
Well,
like in Los
yeah,
Angeles, the county is made up of many cities, and UTLA is just for teachers who teach in the city of Los Angeles. If you live outside the city of Los Angeles, or I should say, if you teach at a school outside the city, UTLA does not cover you.
right. So it goes by the school board or the school district. Okay.
Right.
But
Yeah.
and people use words for different meanings, so I'm glad you clarified that. But in a lot, for instance, Michigan, in a lot of states, we used to have each city within a county had their own school district.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I think it was around the same time as unions in the public sector really started growing as unions. Because remember, the NEA was incorporated by Congress back in the 1800s as a professional organization. I know it's hard to believe that now. And they have morphed over time into being a true union. They admit that now. There was a time in their history when they denied the obvious, but leaving all that aside, at the time that you started having government helping public sector unions, including teacher unions, there started to be this push for unified in the sense that you took all the separate different school districts that might exist in a county and made them all into one school district county-wide.
Mhm.
And different states have different ways that this works. Some
I see.
favor that system, some don't. Some have a mixed system. So, for instance, in Virginia, we have Fairfax County, which is one of the largest counties in Virginia. And they did, before they pushed a county-wide school system, we have cities within Fairfax County. We have Falls Church. We have Manassas. We have other cities within the Fairfax. We have Fairfax City itself. And so when they pushed together, they allowed the cities to vote and decide on whether they wanted to go in the new system or remain their own. And so in Fairfax, we have the Fairfax school system, which is basically pretty much all the counties except Falls Church. The city remained its own, Manassas remained its own. And so we have this kind of hybrid system. In Maryland, other side of the river, once they decided that they were going a county route, you didn't get to choose. They just swallowed up all the individual city school districts or even rural school districts and threw them in by county. And so throughout Maryland, they're all county school districts. And so you have different systems like this. And so, again, the bigger the bargaining unit, the harder it is to get 30%. And if it's spread over a geographical area, and LA is a huge geographical area, it becomes harder also, just because of the geographics involved in the travel or transportation. And so when you both have size or distance and you add to that numbers, a high number, it makes it almost impossible. And that's why you will see when you look, for instance, on the National Labor Relations Board records, you'll see a lot more union votes to organize than you will decertification votes. Okay, they're few and far between.
Because
But
you got to get 30% of the, I guess, 30%
whatever
of the
the
actual
bargaining unit,
people who actually sign up for an election, right?
yeah,
Where before you just need a majority of whoever votes to get in charge. So you could win with 3%,
right,
and you're there forever until somebody gets 30% of
right,
everybody,
right.
just
So
to sign up for the vote, and then you got to win the vote, right?
right. So, for instance, I also represent pilots and flight attendants. I'm involved in the Railroad Labor Act and airlines and railroads. And those bargaining units in most situations are nationwide. Okay. So I will get a call from a flight attendant who is based in, let's say, Las Vegas, and they will tell me how unhappy the flight attendants based in Las Vegas are with the union, how they want to get them out. Okay. And they'll even say, we have 60%. I'll take them at face value. And then I tell them, I wish that's all you had to do to get the vote. But guess what? You have to get 30% of everybody put together. And this is a nationwide airline. This is American Airlines. Okay. They have bases almost in every state. Some they have in 6 or 7, California, or 10 cities within the same state. Now, you don't have to have 30% in each base, but you have to have 30% of that bargaining unit. Oh, guess what? That bargaining unit for flight attendants is 45,000. So you can do the math what 30% is. So when I go back to talk to my friends in Las Vegas, they go, and how do we even travel? How do we get the word out? Now, again, they don't necessarily have all the communication or ability to talk to all their fellow flight attendants. Guess who does? Guess who has every flight attendant's email address, every flight attendant's mobile phone number, every flight. So even if you get that 30%, even if you somehow get a scheduled election, guess who is talking to everyone? And you are not necessarily even have half of those people to talk to. Oh, yeah, this is democracy and this is fairness.
This is what democracy looks like, eh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, is there anything either one of you like to
we,
close?
we need to end on a high note. I'm depressed now. I made
Okay,
myself.
good. Let's hear it. Come on, Larry, you got to pull us out of this.
I have to come in with a high note. Oh God. How much time do we have? Let me think about it. I take a nap. I wake up and.
Well, let me tell you the high note. The high note is that, and this is the one thing I have been so thankful for and has kept me going, is the dedicated, hardworking American patriots who stand up and fight for our Constitution. Okay? I couldn't do any of these cases. I couldn't bring this case to the Supreme Court right now if I didn't have 5 very brave professors at CUNY willing to stand up and sue their anti-Semitic union, sue their anti-Semitic university who has been going along with this, and go all the way to the United States Supreme Court against unbelievable harassment. Okay, and
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to throw in that I was outside the Supreme Court during the Janus when the Supreme Court debated the Janus decision, and our side, we were on one side, and then the union was on the other side. And when Mark came out, the Unionistas just started screaming at him, "Shame on you!" I mean, I was afraid that they were just going to attack him. And if they could, there weren't a lot of cops there. They probably would have. But yeah, no, we need brave people to fight the unions for sure. I agree.
Yeah. So it's these people who are willing to stand up for true democracy, for our First Amendment. That is why we can be optimistic. Okay. And fortunately, through my whole career, those people have not waned. They are still there, and they keep me going. They give me renewed confidence. And as I tell all my clients, I go back to work at right to work. Okay, all my fellow workers, they're not harassing me. They're cheering me on. You go daily into the lion's den. So my admiration for all of you and you, Larry, is immense.
Thank you.
But we have got to keep fighting because that's what the unions want. They want, and as you know, whenever you ask the union a question or for something that they don't want to give you, they tell you the answer is no. And 9 times out of 10, maybe it's not that high, and maybe I'm being unfair by saying it that way. Many people then just accept it and go away. Okay. And the union does that because it works. And if we didn't have people fighting, if we didn't have the foundation that is providing free legal aid to fight this and have the courts correct this abuse and this unlimited, unchecked power, we would be over and the unions would win. And that's
we need more teachers. We need more brave teachers, and they're out there. But they just need to really step forward, as you say. And yeah, I knew when I left the union. I mean, some teachers might not go home with a windshield on your car. My school though wasn't a big union school, so I had a few people who stopped talking to me, which I could care less about. And I chose to just eat lunch in my own room. And I just didn't need any confrontations at that point. But we just need more teachers. And when after the monthly faculty meeting, there was a union meeting, and I got up and walked out. I didn't see anybody else walking out.
Right. No, you are the true Americans. You are the true patriots, and you are protecting our country. And the other point, which which you alluded to. So the first reaction, the mode of operation of the union is to say no. It's impossible. It can't be. You're not going to get it. The next one is to come back and say, you are the only one with this crazy idea. Nobody supports you. And so what happens time after time, the teacher contacts me. And they tell me their experience. I tell them what the law, I tell them what we can do legally. And then I mention, I'm talking with some teachers in your same school district or in a neighboring school district. And they find out for the first time they are not alone. It's another huge lie of the union. Okay? They are not alone. And that's what's so great about your organization, Larry, is that teachers know that they're not alone. And they have a group to go to where like minded patriots are able to share stories to know that they're not alone. And thank you. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, Milton. And yeah, I mean, that was our intention in starting it. I just wish we were, we've certainly had some successes, but I wish we had more.
Well, we always wish we had more, but it's always the fight that counts. Okay. Okay, I'm happy.
Well, if you're happy, I'm happy, Milton.
Oh, well, then you're both happy. That's great. Well, then I want to thank both Larry and Milton for joining us today. And really, if you're a teacher or really probably anybody in a labor union or a public sector union, feel free to call, I think, Larry or Milton. One thing I can tell you is don't go to your union boss to ask if you can get out of the union, because the first thing they'll tell you is no. So please go outside of the union if you're going and ask Larry or Milton or some similar group. You got Milton, the California Teachers Empowerment Network, and Milton National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, and there are other organizations as well. I would look to them first. And again, thank you both so much for this somewhat lively conversation. I appreciate it.
Okay, always a pleasure. Thank you again, Larry.
Thank you, Milton. Take care. Bye-bye.